So hello guys, today we have with us Rhys Richards. He is a teacher and an author who has written and released his new book called Blood on the Crossbar, the Dictatorships World Cup. So first of all, hello Rhys, I'd like to welcome you.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
So first of all, I am a fan of the Argentina national team because of Leo, and it's my curiosity which led me to talk to you about this. So first of all, let's start with how do you get the idea for writing?
Yeah, it's an idea I've had for a while. It came during the lockdown, the first coronavirus lockdown. I found I had a lot of time on my hands, and I started researching the different World Cups. And the 1978 one was particularly interesting. Due to the fact mainly because nobody had ever written about it before, at least in English. There was no full, there was no full book written on it yet. So it was a huge opportunity for me. And yeah, I had a lot of time on my hands as obviously schools were closed. So I decided to take that chance and write the book that nobody had yet written.
And honestly, I think the 78 World Cup is ironically shadowed by Argentinians themselves by the 86 World Cup, right? So I don't think it's
Yeah,
as
that's
much
right.
spoken.
Yeah, I think part of the reason of that is because 1986 is so famous due to Diego Maradona. Obviously, that's he's their most famous, if not just the most famous footballer, probably the most famous Argentinian person of all time. Such a hero to the nation, and because 1978 was so controversial, once they won it in '86, like you're right where you say it overshadowed it slightly. I think it got forgotten about a little bit because it was controversial, and there were some controversies with 1986 also, but I think 1986, like you say, overtook 78 to a lot of people.
Do you think they try to brush it under the carpet somewhere?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it was tough for them to come to terms with the dictatorship, and then everything associated with the dictatorship. Um, People were guilty by association. So I think it was hard for them to, once democracy returned to Argentina, it was hard for the two things to coexist. It was easy for people to say, okay, let's forget about that World Cup now. That it's almost like it didn't happen because it happened during the dictatorship, and everything to do with the dictatorship is bad. So let's forget about that and let's concentrate on 1986. But that's obviously really unfair to the footballers, to play people like Pasareja, to Mario Kempes, all these great players. And it's unfortunate because I think if the two teams played each other, I think the 1978 team will probably win.
Wow, really? You think so? Um, the 78 team would win. Hello?
Yeah, I think so. So that's he's
Wow,
the wild card. He can beat anybody.
that's a big statement.
Yeah, I think so. Overall, I think there's a better balance to the 1978 team, and I think they had a better coach and played maybe more attractive football. But of course,
Menotismo. You prefer
Maradona
Menotismo
is the
to the
equalizer.
Bilardismo, do you?
Absolutely, yeah. He plays it the way I like to see it.
Oh, totally. So do I. So first of all, how do you start researching on a subject which happened more than 50, not yeah, more than 50 years ago? How do you start researching it?
Yeah, yeah. It was tough. It, to be honest, once I told people that I wanted to write this book, so the first thing I did was I created a Twitter account and I told everyone I was writing this book, which maybe you shouldn't do. Maybe you should be a little bit more cautious. But I told everybody, um, and because it hadn't been written about, a lot of people wanted to help me. Fortunately, I knew, and this is a massive coincidence. I knew a friend of mine, his father worked on the World Cup, so he worked for British television, he worked for ITV, and then he was obviously out in Argentina. He lived there for a long time as well, so I had a lot of connections through him. And then I found once you speak to one person, they know somebody else, and then everybody wants to come and tell this story. So yeah, a lot of people had some great stories to share, and I think the fact that it hadn't been written about in English before, maybe they hadn't been asked before, so everyone was really willing to share their stories with me.
Yeah, the Argentinian I'm come from India, so comparatively, the Argentinian dictatorship is the one less known about. So, could you highlight more about what exactly is the story behind the dictatorship and the dictator who loved football?
Yeah, sure. So Argentina was in a state of um, turmoil really in the 1970s. Juan Perón had come back from exile and he was the leader again, leading democracy. And then he died in the mid 70s. And instead of having an election, even though they would do an election the next year, instead of having an election, they just gave the presidency to the vice president, who happened to be his wife, Isabel Perón. So there were a lot of accusations of nepotism. I think people weren't really happy with the fact that they didn't have an election. So there was a lot of violence. There were a lot of bombs going off. There were political assassinations happening all the time. So then the dictatorship came in. The military took over in 1976. Now this happened quite a lot. It's the sixth time it happened in that century in Argentina, the sixth time in the 20th century. So they were used to the military coming in and taking over when things got out of hand. But this particular dictatorship, they had very grand plans. They called it the national reorganization process, and they
Wow.
basically they wanted to get rid of all their enemies, anyone of a left wing persuasion, students, lecturers, anyone of that type was in a lot of danger. And the one thing they wanted to really do was to host the World Cup because they thought if they could stage this World Cup, this huge event, the what I call the first modern World Cup in '78, they could prove to the world that they could do this, and they were that Argentina was safe and Argentina was stable, and thanks to the military in their eyes, um, they were able to deliver this tournament. But it was difficult because the economy was so bad, and the dictatorship took huge risks because they didn't have the money to host the tournament, but they did it anyway. Um, and that, ultimately in the short term, they were very successful because the people of Argentina all united together because people love a success story. Um, you probably relate. In India, there's a lot of different people, but when the Indian cricket team is winning, I'm sure the whole country is happy.
Totally.
And it's the same in Wales when the rugby team, when the football team is, everyone's watching the same thing. So sport can be very powerful to get people, on your side. And I think the dictatorship really saw that.
Oh, also, was this World Cup win a bittersweet one for them because it was hosted by the dictatorship and yet it was the nation in the end who won? Was it like a bittersweet thing or was it totally positive?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right there. It was bittersweet, even for the opponents of the regime. You could hate the government, you could hate what they do, but everybody still loves that national team, and it would be very hurtful for people to see the military take over the team. And if you look at the ceremony when they win the World Cup, Videla, the general, gives the trophy to Passareja. It was
Correct.
meant to be the FIFA president who gave the trophy,
Mhm.
but the dictatorship decided no, we have to be in the front of everything. We have to be in all the photos. We have to be seen with the team, and they used the team to kind of associate themselves with. So it must be incredibly painful for Argentinian football fans who hated the government to see them, so close to the football team.
Yeah. Um, Also, I think while you're talking about Menotismo, I wanted to ask that did Bilardismo approach from, wait, I think I need to reframe the question. When was Menotti made the coach, by the way? That was what I wanted to ask. Do you
So
have
he
any
was
idea?
made the coach in 1974. So in the '74 World Cup in West Germany, it was a very bad moment for Argentina. It was very embarrassing. They got knocked out 4-0 by the Netherlands, who they would later play in the final in '78. Um, and that Netherlands team were incredible. They really reinvented modern football with the total football style.
Yeah.
And Argentina and most of South America couldn't keep up, and it looked like football was going to move into Europe So they had to rip up the rule book. They had to get in a technical coach, somebody who understood that kind of modern game. And there was a coach in Argentina, Cesar Menotti, who was coaching Huracan at the time, and they played this brilliant kind of Dutch style football. And they thought, look, we need to get this guy to be the national coach. The only problem was he was totally the opposite of the dictatorship. So he was a very left wing guy. He
Oh,
was a communist in his youth. He was the total opposite of what the military wanted, but they wanted to win, so they had to use him.
oh, I didn't know there was such a great story behind, Menotti. Also, I think I heard you mention Juan Perón. I think I've seen that name in a stadium somewhere. Is it Racing Stadium's name?
Yeah, Racing. So he was supposed to be a Racing fan. He named they named the stadium after him. But he very much symbolizes the working class of Argentina. I forget the Spanish word, but in English they call the Peronists, they call them the shirtless. So they would take off the shirts. And he had a huge connection with Boca Juniors as well. So the Boca fans loved Peron, and they would sing Boca Peron una corazón, which means
One Heart.
Boca Peron, one heart together.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. So they were. He was. You could say he used football as well. But he was a football fan, whereas the dictatorship, the guy Videla, who was the head of the dictatorship, was not a football fan at all. I don't think he'd ever watched a game of football before the World Cup. But
Oh,
then when the World Cup kicked off, he was in all the games, and he was everywhere because he knew, look, this is so important.
uh, first of all, two things. Do you think that was sports washing of the old era? First of all, and my second question was, do you think Argentinian stadiums have exponentially been named more after politicians than any of the other countries?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely one of the earliest examples of sports washing. There's probably the 1936 Olympics before that, but
Hmm.
then 78 definitely the dictatorship knew. So the World Cup was awarded to Argentina before the dictatorship came in. It was awarded 10 years before, but I think because of everything that was happening, they maybe considered, look, maybe we can't host this. But once the dictatorship came in, they definitely saw, look, we need this is huge for us. I don't think the term sports washing existed at the time, but that's definitely what it is. And then, yeah, the other question in terms of um, stadiums, I'm not sure. Yeah, you might be right there. There's a lot of stadiums named after people to do with politics. I think that's part of the culture. People like to put their name on things. Like it happens in Spain as well, doesn't it? Like the Vicente Calderon and Bernabeu,
Well, yeah.
they're named after people. So maybe that's part of the legacy. But yeah, in the modern day, in Britain, everything's named after different companies. It's not so much people as
Also,
whoever the
I
big
think
business is. But yeah,
the
maybe you're right with that.
the common man liked football more in Argentina, and maybe that's why when they were promoted to higher positions, they thought might as well name our beloved club stadiums after them. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you could be right.
the last few questions I had, one of them is that how do you think it affected the dictatorship and the World Cup affected Argentinian football uh, in the future? Because I mean, that World Cup was actually the one which they won, although it was a dodgy one. That was the first World Cup which they won, and generally the first success is what you build your future years on.
Yeah, it was hugely important to them. You're right. So they in South America they're obsessed with hierarchy, football hierarchy. So an Argentinian as a football nation, they are very proud and you could say very arrogant. So before this, Uruguay have won it twice, Brazil have won it three times, Chile have hosted it, Brazil have hosted it, Uruguay have hosted it, and Argentina think, why haven't we hosted it and why haven't we won it?
Mhm.
So it was a hugely um, like an attack on their pride. So in terms of confidence and kind of saying, look, we've known we're better, we think we're better than everyone. We've always thought that, and now we can prove it. So it would have been huge for their confidence. And yeah, huge for the legacy. I think in the short term, it really strengthened the dictatorship because, like I said, everyone was behind the same team. Everyone had the same goal. Um, they were chanting Videla's name in the stadium at the end of the game, which is unbelievable because, you know, there were thousands of people going missing at the time, and people knew about that. It wasn't common knowledge, but people knew. But that's the power of football. So short term, it was great for them, but long term, I think it kind of sped up the end of the dictatorship because they wanted to invite the world in. They wanted to show the good side of Argentina, but when people arrived, they started to ask questions, and the foreign
Mm.
press met with Las Madres de Plaza de Mayo, so the women who would march on Plaza de Mayo, where they to ask where their missing children were, because of all the kidnappings that were taking place by the dictatorship. And the foreign press found out about that the next year. Amnesty International um, launched an investigation into Argentina, and I think once they invited people in, the cat was out of the bag. So I think long term, it was probably a bad thing for the dictatorship.
Wow, football saved the day. Yes. Um, Also, I
Yeah,
think
yeah, again.
that those kidnappings and the crimes was the reason you named the book Blood on the Crossbar, right? Or is there any other reason too?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, there was a huge campaign to boycott the tournament at the time, which mainly came from Europe, centered in France and in Holland. And in Holland, there was a band that toured the country, like a cabaret show, and the name of the show was Blood on the Crossbar, and it was the whole point of the show was to kind of say, how can you watch football? How can this tournament take place when 100 yards from the stadium there's a concentration camp where they are keeping prisoners, where people are disappearing? And they were basically saying that, look, if you take part in this, then blood is on your hands. And then obviously they came up with the blood on the crossbar um, idea. But a lot of people, so I would say some people opposed it, some people wanted to boycott, and other people thought, this has to take place and maybe some good can come of it. And some people said we have to ignore it, and other people said if we make a fuss, if the world's press goes there, then we can actually find out, and the world can find out what's happening in
Mhm.
Argentina. Because, like you say, it was 44 years ago. It was a very different time. No social media, no internet. These kind of crimes, they could be hidden. But when they invited the press in, everything changed.
Exposed, yeah. And finally, my last question for you would be: everyone knows about the Messis, the Agueros, the Marias, Maradonas, but can you highlight more about Kempes and Pasaresha? I'd like to learn a lot more about them.
Yeah, so they had a great team. I think this is the shame of it because there's so much controversy. People forget that they were a brilliant team. So the spine of the team was great. There was Fijol, the keeper, who was probably who's the River Plate keeper, probably one of Argentina's best ever. Pasareja, the centre back,
Mhm.
who and another River Plate player. A hero of the team who came back to coach Argentina later and coach River Plate later. Less successful, but he's a very successful player. Quite small for a centre back, but very tough.
Yeah.
Very tough to get around. Huge tackler, but he could play as well. In the middle of the park was probably the most important player was Osvaldo Ardiaz, who later came to Tottenham, and he was very very important because he had huge energy, and he was very important to carry the ball, and he was like a box to box midfielder before that kind of thing existed, and his relationship to Kempes was crucial. They were like telepathic. He'd play the ball, and Kempes knew where the ball was going to be. And Kempes kind of grew into the tournament, so he was playing at Valencia at the time, one of only two foreign-based players for Argentina because they wanted to keep um, they wanted to keep the players in Argentina. But he was so good they had to pick him. He grew into the tournament, so he had like a quiet start. Didn't score in the opening round, even though he played really well and he did everything but score. He was like hitting the bar and he was doing incredible saves. And then in the second round, Argentina moved to Rosario, where he played for Rosario Central in his youth. and everything
He's
changed.
from
He,
Rosario,
he
right?
was on
He's from
fire.
Rosario. Was he from Rosario?
He's from Cordoba, but he
Oh, the
no, he
Belgrano,
played.
where
So he's born in
Belgrano.
Cordoba.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and then his famous time in Argentina was Rosario. Those were his, that's what he turned into the player he was, and the crowd loved him there. He felt at home, and when people are happy, when players are happy and comfortable, they play well.
Nothing like it, yeah. Oh, I think they have a stadium named after him too, right? In Córdoba. Estadio Mario
They do, yeah.
Kempes.
I've been there actually.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great stadium.
Where all have you been in Argentina?
So it was about 10 years ago now. I got a job teaching English in a place called San Luis, which is a province not many people know about, but it's near Mendoza, near the border with Chile. And then I traveled to Buenos Aires, Cordoba. Never went to Rosario. That's on the list. When I go back one day, I'll definitely go to the home of Messi and the home of Marcelo Bielsa.
Argentina, yeah. Which stadium was your favorite then? Monumental?
Well, I do have a favorite. Yeah, it's not a surprise to anyone. It's La Bombonera,
Oh,
Boca Stadium. It's a
so,
special place.
hmm. I thought you would say La Monumental with Pasareja holding the fort, the World Cup. That was where the final was held, right?
That is where the final was. Yeah, yeah. That's a great stadium too. They're all so good. But yeah, La Bombonera, they say so it shakes when you're there because of the fans. But the fans say that it doesn't shake; it beats like a heart. So imagine that.
Wow. That must be really beautiful. So anyway, that was it for today, guys. Had a really great fun and learned a lot again about Argentina. I think my fans have gotten used to the fact that I like Argentina so much. So my viewers have gotten used to it. So I've just constantly love making videos on that country. I plan to visit it one day. Yeah. So anyway,
Oh, great! You love it.
thanks for thanks for the advice. Thanks for the answers. We really quenched my curiosity there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye.
It's lovely. Ta-da.